few days to go until the elections. It seems some of the bigger parties, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, may lose some support, although it's not clear that the smaller parties are necessarily going to pick up some support. One person who's been watching them all very closely is the independent commentator, Tebogo Khaas. Tebogo, good afternoon to you. I mean, to look at what you've written about this, how do I sum this up? It seems you're pretty annoyed at all three of the big parties. Is that right? You're annoyed?
You summed it up very well, Stephen, because the three actually seem to be doing what one would expect. In fact, I would even more specifically say the DA and the EFF seem to be tricking themselves to actually throw this one away, because the ANC is currently at its weakest and they don't seem to be taking advantage of the ANC.
So you reckon that some of the parties just aren't taking advantage? I mean, where are the EFF and the DA going wrong then?
Look, in fact, I would even give the EFF some good news and with regards to how they've been running their campaigns. Actually, they've covered quite some substantial ground and they've energized their base as best as only the EFF could, which is basic to hyperbole and even, if I may dare say, the histrionics that they've been putting around. And to some extent, obviously, most of their target market will believe them and they will vote for them. So, in fact, the EFF, I think they stand a better chance of gaining more votes than the DA itself, whom is widely expected will struggle.
I mean, so it's quite strange, because, I mean, I think you must be right that there's more pressure on the ANC. I mean, the ANC said there's more pressure on the ANC in this election. Where is the DA in specifically gone so wrong? And it always seems to boil down to the same thing it always boils down to. It seems to boil down to race.
No, absolutely. I mean, the ANC's got so much not going well for it, to the extent where you would, I mean, for starters, they didn't have the financial resources to mount campaigns as they used to in the past. I mean, previously, the ANC would be throwing all manner of shindigs ahead of elections. We don't see any of those this year. We didn't see any T-shirts giveaways. Where we've seen T-shirts were just minimal, probably leftovers from the previous elections. I wouldn't be surprised if they still had some Zuma faces on them. But on a more serious note, we didn't see the ANC library to the extent that they used to do the campaigns and all that. All that we've been seeing, we've seen a brick and mortar type of campaigning where their president and some of the senior leaders of the ANC have gone door to door, engaging with communities and doing something that I think they've done better than they've done in the past.
It's such a strange election because it's happening quite quickly. You know, there's a sort of month's notice because of the way things played out with the Constitutional Court. I think that, in a way, it's also a pandemic election. And strangely, Tebogo, the pandemic and vaccinations are not a big factor in this election at all. It's not what people are talking about in the election. They actually are talking largely about local government.
You know, you'd recall how much, in fact, this begs into question the report that was delivered to the IEC from retired Deputy Justice Moseneke, where it was feared that elections and campaigns would be super spreaders. Maybe the jury's still out as to whether they will indeed be super spreaders, but so far we seem to have seen the fear of COVID spreading around as it seems to have abated somewhat. And parties have been freely campaigning and congregating their supporters, most notably the EFF, who seem to have thrown away all the social distancing mantra out of the window as they went ahead campaigning. So for most parties, actually, the pandemic or campaigning under the pandemic regulations doesn't seem to have affected them at all. So although, yes, it is a pandemic election, it doesn't, to a large extent, seem to have affected many parties. For the ANC, it actually works in their favor because, unlike the ANC of the past that would seek to fill up the FNB stadiums and the Orlando stadiums and so forth, now suddenly they don't have to be doing any such. They are quite happy with the number of the sizable crowds that have been amassing throughout the election period.
Do you think, Tebogo, there's actually going to be a change in this election? I don't know if we're going to see any of the major metros changing hands. I think we might find that in the end the ANC possibly does slightly better than many people expect, but doesn't really get above 50% in Tshwane, Joburg, maybe Ekurhuleni. The DA just behind them. And then the EFF maybe a little better than it did last year. I mean, there are a few variables. I don't know where Action SA is going to be. What I'm trying to say is, despite all of the campaigning over the last 3 weeks and another week to go, we might find that actually not a lot changes.
In fact, you could be right, Stephen. And if you're to ask me to predict, I would never dare predict. I've already lost a few bets on the IEC and the Concord rulings. So I wouldn't even venture any further bets as to who would succeed. But given what we've seen, my take is that I don't see any of the ANC opponents or rivals making extreme or much inroads insofar as the ANC is concerned in Joburg, Tshwane and Metro. In fact, even where the ANC has lost, like in Tshwane and even NMB, I still believe that the ANC could actually spring many surprises and actually even win majorities, quite honestly, Stephen. It might actually even go against the grain. And even in Joburg, where we've seen initially the DA having led with the EFF formed through a coalition, the ANC could actually come out and win outright, quite honestly. You know, people are tired. We've seen the instability of coalition politics or coalition governments, where the likes of the EFF were actually extracting much more value from the coalition than they're actually bringing to the table in terms of votes or numbers. And I think it might be that the voters themselves, if they come out in numbers, and I expect we will get more people voting this time around than in the previous election, the ANC could very well spring many surprises. And mind you, people won't be voting for the ANC per se. In most instances, they'll be voting for Cyril Ramaphosa. And in the previous election, it was more a repudiation or a rebuke of former President Zuma than it was a rebuke of the ANC. Many of the people stayed away because they didn't like the ANC at the time. But at this stage, they seem to find in Ramaphosa somebody they look in their eye and somebody they believe is trustworthy, somebody who's come out. For the first time, I've had any ANC leader with the humility that Ramaphosa has amassed go house to house or village to village and pleading mea culpa and pleading that they've done wrong and promising to atone for the wrongs of the past. Obviously, it is left to the voters whether they do believe or they do trust the new ANC or Ramaphosa to the extent that they'll go vote for the ANC again. But there's very few options, Stephen, because like I said earlier, the DA itself has messed up. I mean, their messaging is been off key. They've used racism to try and scare people into voting for them, which actually works, which boomeranged. And the EFF, we know themselves, they've been promising everybody the world, which they know that they cannot deliver. So those who are going to be voting, I think it might be that they'll end up saying, look, let me go back to the ANC under Ramaphosa and see indeed if it is a changed ANC, given how they actually been changed the processes of electing councillors and especially mayors for the metros.
I mean, any of the smaller parties you're expecting? I mean, a lot of people looking at Herman Mashaba. I mean, in a way, I think Herman Mashaba's problem is that I just don't know if he has enough support to become mayor, and if he's not going to be mayor and he's not going to go into coalition with the ANC, then what's he going to do?
I'm sure Herman Mashaba, we all would suspect he's running to be a mayor, nothing else. If he can't get a commitment or undertaking that he'll be appointed to that position, I don't see him standing in the back benches of a metro council and trying to slug it out. So the party that I think, or the people that I think will stand to gain more will be Muslim Maimani's independence. I think another one is a banner. They might very well spring a surprise and actually do better than even Herman Mashaba himself in Johannesburg, because I think their strategy to ensure that they put candidates whom the communities have faith in and under the umbrella of a movement such as One SA, they're going to gain more votes, proportional representation seats, which will actually make them even kingmakers. And to the extent that they haven't muddied the water or burned the bridges with any of the parties, there will be a shoe-in for any coalition partners, whereas we know the demands that the EFF have been placing on the ANC or even the